Welcome back to the 2024 APAICS Energy and Sustainability Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS. Our next panel is Innovation, Energy Policy, and Production. This panel will evaluate the effectiveness of policy frameworks, regulatory incentives, and legislative initiatives in facilitating the transition to a low-carbon economy, fostering innovation, and overcoming barriers to renewable energy adoption. The Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provide many opportunities for the AA and NHPI community and other communities to participate in the energy transition. This session will provide insights into the implementation, challenges, and transformative potential of leveraging this legislation to foster economic stability and growth in local communities. It is now my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Nanette Barragán. Representing California's 44th District since 2017, Congresswoman Barragán serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where she focuses on policies to combat climate change and promote clean energy solutions. Her district is one of the most polluted in the nation, with refineries and urban oil wells often located next to homes and baseball fields. As a co-chair of the United for Climate and Environmental Justice Congressional Task Force, Congresswoman Barragán has been a steadfast advocate for sustainable and just energy practices, working to ensure clean air and clean water for our communities. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Nanette Barragán.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Nanette Barragán. Thank you to the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies for the opportunity to join you today. Our energy system is in the middle of a transition to clean energy resources like wind and solar power. As we take fossil fuel power plants off the grid and add new demand from electric vehicles and data centers, we will need reliable clean energy and resilient grid infrastructure. Democrats in Congress and President Biden have invested tens of billions of dollars from the Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act into clean energy incentives and grid infrastructure. It's important that Asian, Latino, Black, and Native American communities are at the front of the line to receive these resources. Communities of color are more exposed to high levels of air and water pollution, more likely to suffer utility disconnections, and more vulnerable to outages from natural disasters. The impacts of pollution and climate change on AAPI communities are often underreported, and AAPI communities are less likely to report good air and water quality where they live. President Biden's Justice 40 initiative prioritizes at least 40% of the benefits of federal investments for disadvantaged communities, and his administration has also launched an environmental justice scorecard to measure the progress of federal agencies to meet this goal. Federal policy should go further to encourage utilities and energy developers to work with communities of color to maximize the local benefits of energy and grid projects. We can establish additional equity metrics that prioritize grants for projects that have a community benefits agreement, diverse hiring, minority business involvement, and good paying union jobs. To improve the energy resiliency of our communities, we must also invest in clean energy microgrids that keep the lights on during power outages and save residents money. I'm proud to lead the Energy Resilient Communities Act, which would create a clean energy microgrids grant program at the Department of Energy. This bill will help our communities protect critical facilities during outages and fight the climate crisis at the same time. I also secured $3 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act based on my Climate Justice Grants Act to support climate and clean energy projects led by disadvantaged communities. The EPA is currently accepting grant applications for those funds, and I encourage you to reach out to my office for more information on how AAPI nonprofits and communities can apply. Thank you again for the opportunity to be a part of your summit. I look forward to continuing our work to support the needs of communities of color in the clean energy transition.
Our moderator for this session is John Yang, the anchor of PBS News Weekend and a correspondent for the PBS News Hour. He reports on major national issues from Washington, D.C. and across the country. John has been part of teams that have been honored with an Emmy, 2 Peabody Awards, and Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Awards. He has covered a wide range of issues from the environment to elections. Thank you, John, and welcome to our next group of panelists.
Thanks very much for that introduction. I don't want to waste any more time to get to this conversation with some very interesting panelists. to talk about the energy concerns affecting both the nation and the AN and NHPI community in particular. I'm just going to ask each of the panelists rather to introduce themselves and tell us their background and their current work. Why don't we start? I'm just going to go down the list as it was given to me. Radha.
Thanks, John. It's so lovely to be with you. I really appreciate being part of this conversation. I recently joined the Bezos Earth Fund, a philanthropy dedicated to making $10 billion of investments in conservation, equity, and climate change action after about 7 years in between the Senate and the administration. I worked for 4 years as senior policy advisor to a woman who I know is no stranger to this community and someone who I have a lot of admiration and respect for, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. And while there, I was super honored to get the chance to advise her on climate change and energy policy matters, helping start the Senate's first ever Environmental Justice Caucus. When President Biden was elected, she sort of kicked me out of the nest and helped me secure a role at the Environmental Protection Agency and later at the White House, where I continued to work with both with Congress and also with energy and environmental justice experts. So we're really lucky to be at both the Earth Fund, but also part of this discussion.
Thanks very much. Now, Aliya.
Hi, I'm Aliya with the Vice President of U.S. Policy and Advocacy at Breakthrough Energy. Breakthrough Energy was founded by Bill Gates, and it works to bring policy, technology, and investment together to make sure markets are working toward decarbonization. A big part of our focus is innovation and clean energy scale up and deployment. And I've personally been in this climate space for more than 20 years. It's been a really rough road in many parts of those 2 decades. I'm so glad I stuck with it through all of that because we're in this incredible moment where we have seen the passage of incredible historic climate laws that we have an incredible opportunity now to be building local communities and developing our economies in a cleaner way.
Thanks very much. Noel.
Aloha, my name is Noel Kalipi, and I work with Aukahi Energy, which is a project in Hawaii that is seeking to build Hawaii's first floating offshore wind farm. My experience in this arena and with policy is I used to work on Capitol Hill with U.S. Senator Daniel Keakaka. I served as his counsel, worked on a number of issues. Ironically, climate and energy wasn't one of my issue areas back then, but I moved back to Hawaii in 2006 and have been involved with Hawaii and with clean energy and energy independence since then, having developed utility scale projects in Hawaii. And I am honored and look forward to participating in this panel.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Noel.
Hi, my name's Noel Crisostomo, and I'm a scientist in the Office of Policy at the U.S. Department of Energy. There, I analyze clean transportation technologies, policies, and incentives, and provide advice on how to deploy infrastructure to realize our nation's climate change and energy security goals. Prior to DOE, I was working at the state level for about a decade in California, supporting transportation electrification, utility regulations, programs, and analysis, looking at EV charging infrastructure and making sure that electric vehicles can integrate with the grid.
Great. Thank you very much. Ali, I'd like to start with you. You talked about the opportunity that we have right now at this moment with the Inflation Reduction Act, the energy components of the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you talk a little bit about what's in there and how they're being implemented, how the implementation process is going?
Yes, I cannot tell you how incredible it is that Congress acted during the Biden administration term and where we're at now. It's really an incredible time. So the Inflation Reduction Act contains in it an incredible set of clean energy tax credits that not only have been designed to include more clean energy sources than has ever existed before, it also includes ways that communities can directly access that funding in a way that was never accessible before. So it used to be that you would need a Bank of America or JP Morgan or a major tax equity partner to help you monetize a clean energy tax credit. Now, there's something called direct pay or elective pay, where communities can actually access that money much more directly for projects that they want to, if they want to develop. That's a real game changer for all kinds of communities, low-income communities, Asian American communities, everybody who can now make clean energy really part of their vision for their neighborhoods.
Radha, I know you've also been involved in this work in the implementation of these measures at sort of the community level. Talk about how it's been going from your standpoint.
You bet, John. Well, I like Aliya share her enthusiasm with regards to the moment we find ourselves post IRA. And, she also mentioned it was rocky. It was approximately 4 decades, almost 40 years of advocacy from every constituency under the sun. And when, President Biden was elected and who ran on a very rigorous climate policy platform, we were able to seize the moment and help communities in the way that we're able to today. Because even though it was a long, rocky road, totally agree there, we weren't wasting time with regards to what policies we need so that when there is the moment, we're able to capitalize on that. And so I think you're really seeing that on the ground with communities who the architects of the IRA really wanted to reach, is that there is at every level the bureaucratic burdens that otherwise would have existed in the IRA. They have been dismantled, and the consultation and the engagement, the requirements for community benefit agreements, for example, making sure that the benefits of these investments are going to the people that need them the most. 40 years is a long time, obviously, but at least we can feel reassured that the IRA is working and that the right policies that we need to achieve multiple policy outcomes are being accomplished.
Noel, what does this look like at the state level?
Well, I think at the state level, Hawaii's unique in that we were the first state to pass legislative mandates for 100% renewable portfolio standard, as well as by 2045. So it means all of our electricity has to be generated by renewable energy. And we also passed a legislative mandate at the state level requiring carbon emissions below the 2005 levels by 2045 as well. So that, having that platform and then this incredible federal policy really helps to match that. And so the implementation, having worked on federal policy, it's great. We feel like, yes, after 40 years, and then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, we have to implement this, right? So the next part is the hard work of implementation, and having, working cooperatively with states as well as with communities and understanding where the needs are is vitally important. And then having the incentives within the federal policy that incentivize developers and corporations to really pay attention to what communities need and to really address access issues is what I think is incredibly key about what has been achieved in the last few years.
And Noel, a lot of what's in the IRA are tax credits, or things that you have to know that they're there in order to claim them and to benefit from them at sort of the street level, as it were. Are these well enough known? Are people familiar enough with these tax credits?
Yeah, one of the big challenges in ensuring the success of achieving the potentially 40% reductions in emissions below 2005 levels by 2030 under Bill and IRA is consumer uptake. But according to a recent survey from JD Power, they found that 40% of car shoppers don't have a good understanding of EV incentives. The good thing about IRA is that it offers solutions to their concerns around charging, around cost. But it's really important that we get consumers familiar, because those who are more strongly educated about the tax credits are 8 times as likely to adopt an EV as those with just minimal understanding. And specific to Asian American communities, we found that they're among the most interested in the nation to purchase EVs. And this could be because Asian Americans have the highest transportation burdens, spending sometimes over a third of their income on transportation. And so in order for us to have more uptake of the tax credits, it's important that we engage with communities and representatives so that folks are aware of the Department of Energy's tools available at energy.gov/save, where they can find EVs, both new and used, up to $7,500 per vehicle, and find chargers that would be available for installing at home, up to $1,000 off their tax credit, and learn about how they can save up to $2,200 per year by switching to an electric vehicle.
Noel, talk a little bit about the how you are working with community groups and other groups to try to get this word out. And also, I'm curious if there's any particular challenge in reaching the AA and NHPI community.
Engaging with community groups involves bringing a coalition of stakeholders who've helped bring together IRA and bill into fruition, making sure that they're aware that consumers don't need to dig into their tax code or the statute to understand that these are accessible to them. So we've partnered with stakeholders to educate about these online resources so that they can really simplify their access to the forms and understand that they can go to their dealer and actually get those credits on the hood of their car. They don't necessarily need to wait until tax filing season such that they can reduce the cost of that electric vehicle.
Aliya, are these, in your view, are these provisions, or these bills, this legislation, is this the end? Are these the goals and everything's what you wanted and achieved, or are they sort of building blocks? And how do you build on them? How do you look to future Congresses who may be different makeup, a different party in the majority, it could be a different party in the White House. How do you build on this and make sure you can keep building on it?
Yeah, well, I will absolutely say this huge success has to be the beginning. It cannot be the end, because as Noel mentioned, if we realize the full opportunity of the bipartisan infrastructure law, of the Inflation Reduction Act, of what has come, we only reduce emissions 40% by our goals, right? We have to get it to zero. We have a lot further to go past this set of tax credits, grant programs, and other incentives. And that's just in the US, right? The US is only 11% of global emissions. So really one of the biggest important pieces of the role of the United States here is to be a leader, an exemplar, a motivator of action globally. So that includes having ambitious targets during the UNFCCC process and the next COPs. That includes us investing in these clean technologies to make sure that as they scale up, the technologies come down that learning curve, and means they become cheaper to produce, which means India, Brazil, Africa, emerging economies can afford the technologies, because those are places that are developing in a way that they can't put a carbon price in place. They are not going to overly regulate their industries because their people need air conditioning and electric lights so their kids can do their homework at night. That they're not in a place where they're going to pay more for energy if they don't have to. Our job in the US is figuring out how do we make it possible, not only for us to get to zero in the US, but also to get to zero in every emerging economy that's wanting to live at a standard that we all enjoy.
And Noe, how do you, again, going back to the state level, develop programs, develop, I don't know, state mandates or sort of regulations, I don't know, at the state level that implement all these? And again, and also getting back to Noel's point, it's getting the word out, making sure people are aware of all this.
I think more important than creating the policy is really incentivizing the behavioral change, right, in the citizens and in the communities themselves, So really kind of focusing on how looking at how does this transition really impact our communities, right? How do renters participate, right, with EVs and with renewable generation and energy efficiency? How do families in Section 8 participate? Really looking at what are the levels that incentivize change, because if we can build the momentum within the population of the behavioral change, the policies will be that much easier because the constituents will be asking for it and speaking about it. So I think that's a huge focus on what can happen. And then with respect to how this impacts Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, especially those of us living in the Pacific, we're seeing the impacts of climate change through king tides and sea level rise. We're seeing burial grounds being, flooded out. This is real in everyday life. So the incentives, just from how we live, to look at how do we change our lives, really matter. And it's almost like out here we're very much so on the front line, dealing with things immediately. So I really think it's focusing on how do you pay attention to behavioral change that will then, help and lead, kind of meeting in the middle.
Again, the same with Noel. You say you're on the front lines. How do you do that? How do you bring out the incentives to change, to get people to behave differently?
Well, for example, in developing utility scale renewable energy, right? It's sitting down with the community and making sure they fully understand the development and the trade-offs that are going to be made. If we put floating windmills on the ocean horizon, that's going to affect your view. Granted, it's a limited time, it's 20 years, right, for a power purchase agreement. And then hopefully in 20 years, we have different technology. But it's being able to see the long term and how you deal with that. If I'm living in an apartment, it's working with companies to be innovative and look at how do we deal with water heat pumps, for example. There's a company, Shifted Energy, here that helps people to participate, because once they see and feel like they're included, then they're interested. Until then, it's oh, that's nothing that deals with me. I'm in this sector, nobody pays attention to me, so I'll just go on living the way my life is. So it's really being able to pay attention and interact with people.
Radha, what about groups like yours? You're not industry, you're not a government entity. Talk about how your efforts and how they work.
So just to piggyback on what Noel was sharing, I think the architects of the IRA understood that most people don't know what electric generating utility they're connected to. But a lot of people know how much they spend on their household utility prices. And so I think one of the most valuable things that the IRA has done is put all of us, customers of energy, customers of electricity, sort of central in these investments. Just to pick a subject, energy rebates. All of us have faced a dilemma, hopefully not anytime soon in this heat, but all of us have faced that dilemma of like, I need a new HVAC system. I know this system, which is Energy Star certified, is going to save my household loads of money over the lifetime of this appliance because I'm going to be sending less money to my utility. The other HVAC, which is not Energy Star certified, it's just what I can afford right now. What the IRA has done is taken that dilemma, which I think most people can relate to, off of the table through things like energy rebates, for example, just to pick one issue. Maybe it's rooftop solar, maybe you need a water pump, maybe you need a new toaster. Whatever it is, it has made those dilemmas that happen all the time routinely. It's taken it off the table so that me, Aliya, John, all of us just intuitively understand and appreciate how much money over the long term we can save by using less energy. And so I think that, and because the scale of this investment is so historic and so substantial, these dilemmas will happen less and less and less into the future.
Yeah, if I could add to what Radha is saying, totally spot on. And I'll note, I think, in the first 20 years of my career, I would say that people often thought about climate change as like a pollution problem or like a regulatory problem. And now I think we're turning a corner, thankfully, that's seeing it's actually an economic development problem. It's actually an economics dollars and cents problem where we don't need to necessarily retrain everyone to think like an environmentalist. They just need to act in their own interest and act like a normal consumer and just buy what's best for them and what actually works for their pocketbook. And that's the IRA is trying to make that a reality to the point where if you track the money, where the tax credits, the grant dollars, where the clean energy investments are happening, they're mostly happening in conservative red states. They're not happening because people are really care about climate change. They're happening because it's good for the communities. It's good for the economy in those places. And that's really a core piece of how we're going to actually solve this problem is people have to see it as one and the same. We like our economy needs to be strong as we make it cleaner.
And I want Noel, I want to ask you, I know you because your field is transportation. Have the electric vehicle market, has that developed in the way you thought it would? Is it sort of not growing as fast? Is it growing faster? Just talk a little bit about that and what maybe the hurdles are, the things that need to be cleared away.
Yeah, if I could add to what Aliya
Sure,
was
please.
saying before turning to that, I do want to also raise our page isn't just about EVs. There are at energy.gov/save tips for energy saving, and then instructions on how to gain access to rebates and tax credits for appliances and home efficiency upgrades. So lots of support for folks that was just described. In terms of EV adoption, one of the really transformative benefits of those laws are the motivation for reinvesting in American-made clean energy, driving the confidence that there will be American-made cars and batteries. And so we're seeing companies announcing EV and battery supply chain investments representing 140,000 new jobs, which will help build on the order of 10 million EVs in the next decade annually. And as people become more familiar with EVs, see that they are able to go further, charge faster, and are more affordable with new makes and models that meet people's needs, I think we will continue to see the growth in the EV market. Electric vehicles are selling 4 times as frequently as they were just in 2021. And this year, total sales each month have increased compared to the year prior. So we are still seeing a growth in the market.
No, what can the government do, or is there a role for the government to expand the number of charging stations?
Yes. So the bipartisan infrastructure law invested $7.5 billion in charging infrastructure and refueling infrastructure. And this is building a national network of convenient, accessible, reliable, and affordable charging along corridors so that people can drive across the country reliably with electric power, but also charge up in their communities in case they don't have a garage. A good point to remember is that right now EVs are mainly charging at home. 80% of the energy is able to come at home. But there are also currently over 185,000 public chargers in the United States today. And this number has nearly doubled over the past 4 years. And so we're looking forward to seeing an expansion of the national network with the administration's goal for 500,000 chargers.
Radha, I think you wanted to add to this discussion about EVs.
You bet. Obviously the numbers that Noel just shared with us are very impressive. And the investments in the IRA are, I think, extremely practical and pragmatic. It's not just supercharging tax credits for new EVs. They also include old EVs. A lot of people don't buy new cars. I am one of those people. But I think the thing, just taking a step back and sharing when it comes to the awesomeness of the IRA is that the IRA investments don't just happen in a silo. It happens in a broader ecosystem. And the thing that makes me so optimistic about the work that Noel and DOE is doing with regards to EVs is that, we have a private sector-led, federally enabled IRA, and we also have a regulatory scheme principally led by EPA that's going to require things like the adoption of EVs. And so what I appreciate about what Congress has done is that they've thought very thoughtfully about putting customers like you and I at the forefront of this bill, but also ensuring that the people who are going to comply with EPA's regulatory schemes, whether it's a power plant operator or folks who need to meet fuel efficiency standards, they can do so in a more efficient, more affordable, faster way. And so just feel really excited about not just the EV aspects. EV is, I think, that sector specifically is illustrative of this broader dynamic of how we're investing in places where we know we have to meet all sorts of different climate-related regulations.
Very good. Aliya, I want to turn back to you and talk about this. I don't want to get I don't want to say the political process, because that makes people's eyes glaze over and also turns people off. But how do you sort of build support, bipartisan support, when there's debate over some people disagreeing that this is a man-made problem, that climate change is a man-made problem? Do you just focus on the monetary aspect, the pocketbook aspect?
Yeah, I think this is the number one challenge for all of humanity, is how do we get back on the same team rather than fight each other based on what t-shirt you're wearing. It is so important for people to remember what actually matters versus kind of like, is your team winning? The political polarization right now is not good for climate, and it's not good for the economy. It's not good for anything. You know, the first thing that we think about at Breakthrough Energy is how can we build more bipartisan support? How can we make getting to zero emissions, getting to a stronger economy, something that everyone can embrace regardless of your value system? I think that's a really, really important thing, because it's not about whether one way wins or another way. We are in this together. I'll say that, we're looking already to 2025, and we're thinking about the next few years. Some folks might know there's a tax negotiation expected in 2025, where a lot of the tax credits that were created for clean energy could be at risk. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there's a lot of competing priorities for federal dollars, and a lot of companies and a lot of investors are watching that, and they're saying, well, should I invest my money? Should I be doing this? How can I, oh, maybe we should pull back. That's the opposite of what the private sector need. And as Radha mentioned, this is private sector led. Those tax credits, these grant dollars, none of that money gets spent without private sector partnership, without a private company, without private investment, making it actually happen. And the public money just sort of like helps move it along a little faster. We cannot do this without the private sector. And that means they need to see a level of commitment and certainty from the federal government that that promise will be delivered. They're not going to pull that back. That investment is good to create jobs in any state. And in fact, right now, in more Republican states than Democratic states. So it's in the self-interest of some of the folks who did not vote for those bills in the first place, and they might say they don't like them moving forward, but actually it's better for their constituents, it's better for their voters if they were to support it. That's something that I'm very optimistic about as we move forward. If you look way back in history, Congressman John Dingell of Michigan, who was an incredible congressperson, I don't think anyone could argue he was just an incredible human being. He was one of the hardest folks to get on board on climate and clean energy issues, because it wasn't great for the Detroit area. It wasn't great for Dearborn, for his district. The politics follows the economics at the end of the day. Rick Boucher was also someone who he was a representative in Virginia, a pretty serious coal country area. He was a Democrat. It was hard to get him on board for clean energy issues. It follows the economics, and I'm really hopeful that as the implementation of these tax credits and these clean energy programs continues, we will see the politics follow that economic powerhouse.
No, I saw you nodding in agreement to many of the things that that Aliya was saying. Is this does that ring true at the state level as well?
Well, I was gonna jump in on the long-term developer level, right?
Sure.
For something like a floating offshore wind, which has a 10 to 12 year development cycle, we we need to see that policies are going to remain in place, right? And when you're trying to finance something that has that long of a term, to get to revenue generation, knowing that the tax credits are going to withstand a political change, for example, really impact the economy, and it really impacts the ability for people to even get out of the starting blocks, right? Because if people think, oh, this is good for 4 years, and in another 4 years we're going to have a total switch, they're not going to invest, and we're not going to be able to move the needle at all. So I do think at that, I just wanted to, emphasize and exponentially say thank you to for all of the work, because on the implementation side, it's absolutely vital that the investors and the people who are funding these long-term projects really feel comfortable that they're willing to be patient with their capital, but they're not willing to deal with uncertainty. So that part really matters. And I wanted to add that the bill, investment in infrastructure tends to always be the last priority, right? It's kind of like you have your list of, here's my to-do list, and I get to this one and I just don't have the energy to deal with it right now, right? And that's kind of how our country has dealt with infrastructure. But transmission lines, bridges, all of these things, it matters, and it impacts everyone and can help with daily lives. So I don't want to lose that point, because that's such a critical part of this. It's really in helping us to get on the same team. It's also helping us to make what's important easier to achieve. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Noel, talk a little bit more about the importance of the private sector.
Yeah, we're seeing a renaissance in American industry to develop homegrown clean energy. So alongside the 140,000 EV and battery supply chain jobs that I was mentioning earlier, $120 billion invested thus far in the battery manufacturing supply chain, $40 billion in electric vehicles, 1.25 in clean heat pumps and HVAC. Almost $500 million in land-based wind, almost $9 billion in nuclear energy, almost $6 billion in offshore wind, and $17 billion in solar. So these are really historic efforts to build our domestic supply chain and secure our energy future.
So it's a pocketbook issue, not just for what's coming out of the pocketbook, but what could go in. If these industries are developed. Does anyone want to talk about a little bit about that, about sort of selling that point, having people realize that this is in some ways an economic development issue as well?
So I'd be happy to chime in. I think I've already outed myself as someone who thinks this is the best bill that's ever been passed. I think the IRA is a model for how we can have a main policy objective. Like, obviously the discussion is centered around the clean energy, climate related provisions of the IRA. We know the bill is bigger than that, but that is central to the bill. But how each dollar of taxpayer money can be used to achieve multiple policy objectives and aims. So, Noel didn't just talk about the economic impacts of these dollars. He also talked about the national security impacts of these dollars. There's a national security benefit when we produce more of our energy here at home. We've already discussed how there's an affordability aspect of these dollars. The thing that I feel very proud of, excited by, is the equity components of these bills. There's also a very deliberate, sustained, muscular approach to making sure that the people that need these investments the most are not left behind. Because if these investments are just words on a page and there's not constant consultation and engagement, we know that they will be based on previous investments. There's also an effort to make sure that the jobs that we make here at home that Noel just described are the best possible family sustaining jobs. And so I think that, again, 40 years is a long time, but boy, did we seize on a moment to not just act on climate, but also achieve loads of different really important, broadly shared policy objectives.
Ron, I want to stay with you. In addition to the IRA, the IRA and Bill acts, there's also something called, and on the equity point you were talking about. There's also the Justice 40 initiative, which I presume you're familiar with. Talk a little bit about that and how that addresses this equity issue.
You bet, John. We're talking about IRA, but you're absolutely right. There's also the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, that are investing, I think, collectively maybe more trillions of dollars. And so the Biden administration has, I think, approached this very thoughtfully and practically. How do we make these investments while also making sure that the people who we care deeply about, who are also are disadvantaged in many different ways, don't get left behind with these investments? And so the Justice 40 initiative, just to put it as succinctly as possible, is a commitment and goal to ensure that 40% of the benefits of investments go to disadvantaged communities. It's more than that, though. It's a collective, collaborative effort between principally the White House Council on Environmental Quality, who leads a lot of the environmental policymaking at the White House, with all of the agencies who are on deck, who are responsible for programs that we know can help these communities, DOE included, DOE, EPA, DOI, and others. I did a very bad thing by using an alphabet soup there. Department of Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy. These agencies have worked with CEQ to establish what specific programs are under their purview in which they're administering can go to help these communities specifically. And also how to make sure that we're constantly doing the consultation and the engagement that we need to make sure that we're successful in closing that resource gap. The final thing I'll say about Justice 40 is that it's also very data-driven. And one of the most, I think, valuable things that have come out of the Justice 40 initiative is the development of a tool, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, that identifies every community in this country at the census level, which is a really impressive granularity. I think it's first of its kind. That should be considered with regards to federal implementation of Justice 40 as a Justice 40 community. And of course, we know, it shows us what we already all know, that no state does not have a Justice 40 community or an EJ community. And of course, our goal, I hope, should be that no state has a community at all. So just a little bit of background on a program I obviously don't like at all.
Noel, talk about a little about this from the state level. She said, there's no state in the union that doesn't have a community that could benefit from that. Talk about what that looks like in Hawaii.
What it looks like in Hawaii is that we've been building on that. The Department of Energy's person who led energy equity was Shalanda Baker, who had been at our law school. So we had been having these discussions in Hawaii. Our Public Utilities Commission actually has an energy equity docket that is creating state policy that would require the development of when you develop projects to ensure that there are energy equity requirements for community built into the policy and to the system. So it also is in Hawaii, it also you can't get a project built or a policy passed without intense community participation. And there's also our islands are only so big, right? And when you look at many other places on the continent as well, certain geographic areas bear the brunt of the more industrialized activities versus other areas, right? So it's really looking at how do we address that? How do we ensure that we don't just continue to say, well, that side of the island is where all industry is, so keep it there and keep this side pristine, right? How do we actually work through all of those? And those are very complicated discussions. But I think discussions that occur across our entire country, right? I mean, because it goes to the fundamentals of what is fair and how we all participate and what are our roles in taking care of the collective, and then going back to the incentives and the energy rebates and everything. How do we participate in this process?
No, I'd like to stay with you. You've talked a lot about the federal government, about regulation, about tax legislation, how that helps. We've talked about private industry investment. I know Hawaii has some very ambitious goals on renewable energy generation and on negative carbon emissions. Talk about how all these things have to come together in order for a state like Hawaii to achieve these goals.
Yes, absolutely. And having the federal policies and the bills that the Biden administration has been successful in passing with Congress really help to do that. You have these audacious goals set, and then you're working at the state level, and then all of a sudden there's there's recognition of the effort and what is needed at the federal level to build the momentum. For example, the investment in infrastructure. That's critically important if we're going to make all of this work. In transportation, for example, yes, the conversion to EVs, but there's also, how do you decide when you take rail and when you ride the bus, when you ride a bike versus just automatically always getting into an automobile, right? And so putting all of that together, and to Aliya's point, making sure people are focused on what actually matters versus the color of our t-shirt really, really is how we drive, back to my original point, the behavioral change, right? Because if we can all show how, one, we all are included in the wave, then we're all incentivized to continue. And so
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, John, that's how the layers all come together, and it's tough. It is super hard. I mean, it is incredibly hard to reach this every day.
Noel, I think you wanted to add something to these points.
Yeah, regarding the opportunity to ensure all communities are participating, one of the benefits of IRA's tax credit designs is ensuring that the market is incentivized to install charging infrastructure and support folks who have traditionally not driven EVs. So there are targeted infrastructure tax credits to install chargers in low-income and non-urban areas where the market has previously been behind. And when we think about these chargers and making sure that there aren't local emissions, it's important to point out that as we see all this new electric load added to the grid, the Energy Information Administration has forecasted that in this year, solar and battery storage are projected to account for over 80% of generating capacity. And so it'll be clearer that these are driving truly clean energy efforts.
If I could quickly add to that, realizing
Please.
we're in time, we have to remember too, not only do we have to take the current amount of electricity we're generating and make it all clean, we are likely going to double or triple the amount of electricity we need over the next few decades. And that's, I mean, as we electrify transportation and start moving to electric vehicles, as we think about buildings that need to go from gas to using electric, as we think about the data centers that need to be sited somewhere, more increasingly maybe for artificial intelligence, which maybe we want in the US and not in China or other less friendly places, we are going to have a huge demand on the need for energy and electricity. And the cheaper and cleaner that is, the better it is for literally everyone. And that's one of the most important pieces, as we look at the Energy Information Administration and others who are showing us what we're already doing. As we look forward on that, we have to be really diligent about implementing the IRA very well right now, and then think about the next steps and how we keep that going.
Aliya, looking forward. I think that's you're going to have. I think you have the last word because we're out of time. So Aliya, I want to thank you. I want to thank Radha, Noel, and Noel. Thank you very much for this very interesting and illuminating, no pun intended, about energy and illumination. very educating conversation. Thank you very much.
What a great day we've had together. I hope you've learned as much as I have from our amazing panelists and speakers. I'd like to recognize our summit partners, Amazon, Edison International, Toyota, Breakthrough Energy, Delta Airlines, Ford Fund, and Southwest, as well as all of our panelists, moderators, and speakers. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected office. Please visit www.apaics.org to learn more about our work, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.